I do not, in fact, come from the land of the ice and snow where the midnight sun and the hot springs flow, but close enough.
Shut up and sit down. Shut up and sit down.
Now, the good thing about calling my show Why It Doesn't Work For Me is that I can explain that even movies that are objectively good aren't going to be for everyone, and more specifically in this video I'm going to dive a little bit into how elements that don't matter to some people can ruin a movie for others, and the rationality of the point you're making doesn't really have much to do with it. So I don't get the tomatoes thrown at me right away, we'll dive straight in with the good.
Starting with the obvious Thor himself. At least his personality and screen presence. Most people just considered Thor as the other guy, the guy that kinda needed to be there and that everyone liked, but nobody would really miss if he were gone. Plus, Chris Hemsworth was understandably growing tired of the role, as his own second movie didn't do all that much for his character, and writers didn't seem to know what to do with him in team-up movies unless Loki was there.
So a complete rethink of this character was really warranted here, and both Taika and Chris did an amazing job of reinventing the character and making him
just a joy to watch.
In addition to Thor's character, the entire Thor series has been transformed. Everything from the aesthetic to how the characters talk has been thrown into neon paint pods, and it's kind of amazing. I don't really have much to say about this transformation except I kind of liked the pseudo-Shakespearean royal family drama Kenneth Branagh came up with. I do think it was the right thing to do because back in 2011, well, just imagine being back before the MCU became the biggest cultural phenomenon that ever existed outside of Star Wars. Look at this comic and tell me what a Thor film would look like.
Especially taking into account the Iron Man movies and the upcoming release of the World War II drama that was Captain America, the MCU was really grounded at this point in time. It was trying to make it feel as much like our world as possible.
Honestly, I think if they had released the original movie in the style of Ragnarok, audiences at the time wouldn't have known how to react to it.
And also, I am a real history lover. I love the stories of powerful families and learning how they shape the world we live in today. Thor feels very much like one of those dramas. This is very much a family, but they can never put family first because they are in charge of the lives of millions.
That's what I find so fascinating. How do you reconcile being a family, being a parent, with always having to put those you love second and even use them, sometimes in incredibly cruel ways?
So I am no more than another stolen relic, locked up here until you might have use of me.
Why do you twist my words?
You could have told me what I was from the beginning. Why didn't you?
You're my son. I wanted only to protect you from the truth.
Well, because I'm the monster parents tell their children about at night?
That was incredibly interesting, and it makes sense because Thor is a prince, Loki is a prince, Odin's a king. That makes their dynamic and how they relate to the world around them so brilliant.
In Thor Ragnarok, however, there is no regality to any of the characters. Not that it would really have fit into the movie, but I am of the opinion that taking away the majesty of this character, and even more so Loki's character, who we'll get to, was really a regrettable sacrifice.
But that is something that I put in the doesn't work for me category, because I know Thor's royal heritage isn't something everyone really cares about. So that one's a personal thing. The next issue, on the other hand, well, decide for yourself.
Loki was really hard done by in this movie, and I do understand why. Taika Waititi said there's no point in making a Thor movie if he's not the coolest thing in it, and I totally agree.
However, I've always been of the opinion that if you have to tear down other characters to make your main character look better, you're not doing a very good job of making a great protagonist. Yes, the main character, especially in superhero movies, always have to be better in most ways, but that doesn't mean you have to tear down other characters to get there, especially villains. I mean, the stronger and smarter the surrounding characters are, the better the protagonist looks.
Anyway, I get it. Loki was everyone's favourite thing about the Thor movies to the extent that it wasn't even really worth watching Thor if he wasn't nearby. But cast your minds back. Remember just how relatable and sympathetic he was in the first Thor movie? Remember how magnetic and threatening he was in the Avengers? Now,
Get help! Help him!
Oh, classic.
Still hate it? It's humiliating.
No, not for me, it's not.
Now, I was wondering whether to put this in the not for me category or the bad category, but ultimately I decided to leave that up to you, because there's an argument to be made that since this is a soft reboot, things that took precedence in earlier films don't necessarily need to be addressed here. I say either you're making an interconnected story or you're not. It's perfectly acceptable to ignore characters and plot points for a while if you're going to come back to them. In this case, however, that will never happen.
if you wanted to make Thor a more interesting character, you didn't have to achieve that by making Loki less so.
So I think that is all a matter of opinion, depending on what you think is important to the character of Thor, his world, and his mythos. So now, let's talk about what's honestly bad.
From characters to character relationships, let's talk about Thor's primary relationship in the trilogy. No, not Jane. Loki. Unlike the other Avengers, Thor doesn't really have a lot of psychological baggage. The other members of the team have deep internalized issues. Other than his decision about whether or not to be king, Loki is really the only problem Thor has in his life, up until another sinister sibling turns up to wreck his shit even more. Loki has been an important player in the Thor movies for good reason. I think a lot of this can be blamed on Dark World, because if they had just scrapped Malekith and focused more on resolving that personal storyline, Ragnarok would have had more license to push this relationship into the background. But there is no true resolution to their complex issues.
And if you don't believe me, let's go through Loki and Thor's involvement with each other in this movie.
Thor exposes Loki as Odin. They go to Earth to find the real Odin. Odin dies and Thor is pissed off at Loki for it. They get separated. Thor is imprisoned while Loki is welcomed into the Grandmaster's court. Thor mopes and doesn't acknowledge any of the abusive and sinister shit his father is revealed to have done.
Hurts, doesn't it? Being lied to. Being told you one thing and learning it's all a fiction.
We get a couple of childhood anecdotes. They plan to steal a ship. Have one conversation that is emotional and well written but addresses nothing about their relationship except for the fact that they can't function as brothers anymore. Loki double crosses Thor because of course he does. Thor sees it coming because of course he does. Loki has a turnaround for some reason and decides to go back to Asgard. They fight Hela, and this is meant to be a resolution to the complex family machinations, deep-seated psychological issues, and personal growth that drove these two brothers apart.
Maybe this would have been fine if there were a chance for a resolution later, but that is never going to happen. I know there's a Loki TV series coming up, but that's more than likely going to feature an alternative universe Loki or a past Loki, and Thor is not likely to feature in it much. For all intents and purposes, the Loki we know, the Loki we have been with since phase 1 of the MCU, is dead. And the fact that his brother never truly acknowledged how sick and twisted their family was makes it all the sadder.
One of the things I was gratified to see in this movie was that it actually brought up that Asgard is a race of conquerors. One of the reasons I think Loki is more sympathetic than he probably deserves to be is that he is no different from Odin or anyone else in Asgard, even Thor pre the first movie. That is something that should be obvious to anyone who knows that they live in a warrior culture. Part of the reason Thor is so loved is because he is a warrior.
You know, I'm 1,500 years old.
I've killed twice as many enemies as that, and every one of them would have rather killed me, but none succeeded.
So in the first Avengers movie, when Thor is lecturing Loki about being a king,
You miss the truth of ruling, brother.
I wanted to grab him, shake him, and say, how do you think your father got that golden throne? By asking nicely?
And since I didn't see many people talking about that,
Look at these lies. Proud to have it. Shamed of how he got it.
it felt a little vindicating to see that actually acknowledged. However,
The one thing I think was a big writing mistake is Thor is never shown coming to terms with it. He never acknowledges that everything he believed about his home, family, and culture is a lie. There's never a moment where he and Loki have a conversation where Thor says,
I get it. You're still an arsehole, but I get it.
We see Thor grieving his father's death, but the situation Odin left for Thor, hell, all of his children, is a shambles, and Thor never acknowledges this at all. The film still treats Odin as this all-knowing, benevolent being who, yes, has made mistakes, but is still ultimately right.
And if you don't believe me, just look at how they portray him.
It's almost heavenly.
If you're going to acknowledge a dark past, you have to have your main character react to it in some way. This could have put all the characters of the Thor mythos in a completely different light.
Even the ever-benevolent Frigga, because let's face it, she did participate in the gaslighting of both her children, or at least was party to the lies that shaped both their lives.
But nope. Thor never thinks twice about his kingdom's legacy beyond.
Asgard is not a place. Never was. Asgard is where our people stand.
Which is so meaningless. Thor has never been particularly attached to Asgard as a place. Yes, he loves his people, as any prince should, but Asgard as a land has never really been an issue in his life.
He was very happy to leave it all behind as long as he still got to protect people. So making this the realization he comes to is so hollow.
Wouldn't it have been so much more poignant for him to come to terms with this dark legacy? Maybe even give up completely on his responsibilities as a leader?
Only to realise that there are real people behind the legacy who are innocent of its evils, and through that, come to terms with it. Wouldn't it have been great to see a hero not only grieving the loss of a loved one, but coming to terms with the fact that loved one wasn't the person he thought they were?
I am by no means saying that this had to be the arc Thor goes through, but when you establish that a character's entire worldview is a lie, you kind of have to show it affecting them somehow. Instead, the arc
Asgard is not a place. Never was.
seems to have been pulled out of thin air. Because, like I said, that has never been something Thor has bothered with. He even says it earlier in this goddamn movie.
People trapped down there are all that matters.
Okay, I've covered Thor's secondary arc. It's time to move on to his primary one, which in my humble opinion is even worse.
Are you Thor, the god of hammers?
Are you sure you want me to answer that? Okay, picture this scenario. You go to a Halloween party and you want to dress up as Thor. Whether it's the Marvel version or the original Norse god doesn't matter. You get dressed up and you go to the party without Mjolnir. Someone asks you who you've come as. I guarantee they will say, "Where's your hammer?"
Are you Thor, the god of hammers?
Thor has been separated from his hammer before as a method of testing him and showing the audience who he is without it, but he's never really been disconnected from it.
Even when he's unworthy and someone else picks up the hammer, they become Thor. They don't just become such and such plus Mjolnir, they take on the title of Thor.
Trying to tell the audience that Thor doesn't need his hammer is like telling them Iron Man doesn't need his suit.
And even though it was done poorly here too, it was done better in Iron Man 3. God, I'm actually praising Iron Man 3. They take Tony's suits away as a method of testing him and showing the audience what he is capable of with just his wits, because they are his greatest weapon. But here's the thing. Yes, Tony Stark is Iron Man, with or without the suit, but he needs the suit to be Iron Man, to be identified as the hero Iron Man, and to function as that hero. Imagine we were watching the Tony Stark show with no suit, which, yes, would be entertaining, but it wouldn't be Iron Man.
Yes, it is a good story device to remove characters from the people, places and tools they rely on, especially those through which they define themselves, but making the character arc they are the same without it is not just hollow, it's wrong, because of course a character is going to be different when you take them away from the thing they use to define themselves. That's the entire point of taking it away from them.
Tony is different without his suit. Hell, even Captain America is different without his shield. He's still the same paragon of virtue, but not the frontline symbol of American ideals anymore.
I'm willing to concede that if you wanted to change a character to the point where they're not the same person anymore and make it a permanent change, this would work. But I think a character that it probably could never work with is Thor.
Are you Thor, the god of hammers?
Yes, Odin, he kind of is. Now, please understand me, I am not afraid of change. If a character remains the same, what point is there to reading about them? And even if I don't like where a writer takes a character, it doesn't mean the interpretation is bad. It could just mean it's not my cup of tea. Or in this case, not my glass of wine. That is so bad. I think I've had too much of these. But with Thor, this character is so ancient that there are certain things about him that aren't open to change. I would argue the hammer is one of them. Take the Halloween example, or any iteration of this character.
The hammer is so inexplicably linked to Thor that it becomes the main feature through which you identify the character.
One of the reasons I truly believe this is a bad decision is Marvel seems to agree with me.
This plot point was so worthless that they immediately dropped it in the next movie Thor appeared in and gave him a new hammer. Thor's entire subplot in that movie was a quest to get a hammer because...
Are you Thor, the god of hammers?
Yes. That may not be his title, probably because it doesn't sound all that cool.
Who are you?
I am the god of thunder!
But yes, he basically is. And trying to subvert that the way they did added nothing to the character.
Whether you like or hate Thor Lebowski in Endgame, you have to admit it added something to the character. Something good, something bad is up for debate, but this very literally added nothing and took time away from other areas of the character that were worth exploring.
So what's my takeaway from all this? Well, I did like Thor Ragnarok, and I'm not here to ruin that for anyone else. I did truly have a blast watching this movie. I kind of liken it to eating cotton candy. Fun to look at and great to eat, but with no true substance. No matter how much of it you eat or how much you enjoy it, you will still be left hungry. But that's the great thing about movies. I truly believe that everything I have brought up here today are legitimate problems, but whether or not they were enough to ruin the movie is entirely down to the person.
My dad took my mum to see this and she hates superhero movies. They just don't do anything for her. And she liked this one. Maybe she liked it because it was cotton candy. It was a fun, colourful experience that anyone, comic fan or not, can understand.
And I just came to the realisation while writing this that Thor Ragnarok on its own is a great Thor movie. I still don't believe audiences would have responded to it as positively in 2011 as they did post Joss Whedon and James Gunn.
but still a great Thor movie. It's the character beats, plot points, and relationships established in previous films that make it not work. And that is a shame, but even if you are a writer taking over a product and want to breathe new life into it, you do have to do justice to that which came before.
So my final conclusion is Thor Ragnarok is a great Thor movie, but a bad MCU movie, and it is partially due to what has come before that make it not work for me. So what do you think of Thor Ragnarok? I'm assuming most of you liked it, but what do you think about the comments I've made? Do you think they're fair? Do you think they are legitimate problems, or do you think it's all a matter of opinion? Please leave your answers in the comment box below, and don't forget to like and subscribe and visit my social media. Please consider becoming a Patreon. That link is also in the description. You can go from a Loki patron to a Nightwing patron, and I would be incredibly grateful if you became a Nightwing. We could always use more Nightwings in the world. Now, for the next video, I gave you all a clue in my Young Justice video that this one was going to be Thor Ragnarok, but today I'm going to forgo all that nonsense and just spell it out for you. Let's go.